jokes lately?
Alrighty, let's go ahead and take a look at early voting. I think the results are going to be very shocking. But before we get into that, let's cover a couple of things that happened recently that is blowing up all over the news. Unless you live under a rock or you're not aware of what's going on, recently there was a huge rally, and I mean it was huge, in Madison Square Garden. Trump was there, and the media was saying it was a big old Nazi gathering, and it's just terrible. This same crap that the left pulls all the time. And people are actually getting tired of it. This is why a lot of Democrats are leaving the Democratic Party and going elsewhere. Not specifically to the Republican side or not specifically to Trump, but are definitely leaving the Democratic Party. They want something better. But the truth be told, the vast majority of them are voting for Trump. There was 25 speakers. This thing was like a 6-hour marathon. And the only thing the left could do is zero in on one stupid joke from Tony Hinchcliffe. Now, Tony is funny. If you don't know who he is as a comedian, you can go check him out. Or you can be part of this fake outrage that's happening over Tony's joke. Tony is funny. He's a roast comedian. In other words, he purposely goes out of his way to make fun of people, no matter who they are. If you really want to see how funny this guy is, go watch the roasting of Tom Brady. His set was really good. Or if you just want to check out a show, go to Kill Tony on YouTube and you can check him out there. Anyways, let's go see what it is that Tony did that everybody's up in arms about. Let's check out the joke. Let's listen to it and see if it's as bad as people make it out to be, or as the media's made it out to be.
This is very different than where I'm used to performing, though. I'm used to nighttime with people drinking, not so many babies in the crowd, and people that are obviously only here for Lee Greenwood tonight. Normally, I don't make my political beliefs a known thing. It's divisive for a comedian to do that, but just know I sleep well at night knowing who I'm voting for. Yeah. When I lay down and my head hits my pillow, it is a fantastic pillow, by the way. I was staying at the Four Seasons up by Central Park one night, and I laid my head down, and it felt so good, and I thought to myself, what an amazing pillow. I have a little bit of money now. I could buy a good pillow. And I took the pillowcase off, and there it was. My pillow, my pillow, my pillow. And damn it, I bought 4 of them. And if you use the promo code KILLTONY, you can also buy 4 My Pillows. There's serious stuff happening, people. I live in the great state of Texas now. 18 years in Ohio, 20 years in California, and I got to see California turn to absolute horrendous thing. And traveling the world.
It is interesting the number of people who have moved to Texas. Podcasters, you know, like Joe Rogan, Tony Hinchcliffe, he's moved there. Tim Pool, Elon Musk, these people are all moving to Texas.
I got to see San Francisco turn into one of the most demented cities, one of the greatest downfalls I've ever seen. And that is where the other candidate worked for 2 decades. And it's absolutely wild to see. And in Texas, stuff is really, really crazy. We're right there by a wide open border. Where are my proud Latinos at tonight? You guys see what I mean? It's wide open. There's so many of them. It's absolutely incredible. Believe it or not, people, I welcome migrants to the United States of America with open arms. And by open arms, I mean like this. It's wild. And these Latinos, they love making babies, too. Just know that. They do. They do. There's no pulling out. They don't do that. They come inside, just like they did to our country. Republicans are the party with a good sense of humor. Free speech is under attack, people. I host a show, and each week I get updates what words we're allowed to use and not use anymore. It's happening right now the past few years. It's a real thing. And, you know, used to be able to tell people to Google stuff. My mom's a boomer in the state of Ohio, and there's no convincing her of anything. She's eating the cats. She's eating the dogs. They're eating the pets up there. It is absolutely wild times. It really, really is. And, you know, there's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico. Okay. All right. Okay. We're getting there. Now, again, normally I don't follow the national anthem, everybody. This isn't exactly a perfect comedy setup.
Now, of course, there's fake outrage coming from the left, and I'm not saying all of it is fake. There were some people who were seriously offended by it. That's fine, we get it. But that's how comedy is. You're going to have some people who like the jokes, some people who don't. That's comedy. If you don't like what he's saying, then don't listen to him. It's just that simple. What we don't want is people go, oh, we don't like what he's saying, therefore cancel him. That's not what we're looking for. Comedy has been under attack now for years, and it's just starting to open up once again. I would have said probably that joke is bad timing because the left right now, this close to election day, is going to look for any little thing that they could blow up. Take it out of proportion, run with it, try to do whatever they can to smear Trump because of a joke that a comedian said. And that's exactly what's going on. It wasn't Trump that said the joke, it was Tony who said the joke. Whether you like the joke or not, that's what the left does. They choose times to have fake outrage because they have nothing going for them policy-wise. Anyways, he didn't go on to say that the Puerto Ricans are garbage. He said that Puerto Rico was a floating island of garbage, which is another video that I will touch on later on. Anyways, like I said, it's killed Tony. Congrats to Tony because he picked up a crap load of new subscribers. I will leave the link down below in the description if you guys want to go check him out. But talk about fake outrage. Listen to this crap.
And you know, one other thing that you'll see next week, Caitlin, is Trump actually reenacting the Madison Square Garden rally in 1939. I write about this in my book. President Franklin Roosevelt was appalled that neo-Nazis, fascists in America were lining up to essentially pledge their support for the kind of government that they were seeing in Germany. So I don't think we can ignore it.
So a couple of things. I love how Hillary Clinton says, I wrote about this in my book. Wow, how did you know this was going to happen? How were you able to get it in your book when a rally just happened, when, yesterday? But she managed to get it in her book. I like how she used the words Trump is reenacting, but this is the type of rhetoric that comes from the left. This is way more serious than the stupid joke about Puerto Rico being an island of garbage. Seriously. How it is that Hillary's even allowed to talk in interviews is beyond me. But I am a true believer in free speech, and she has the right to say whatever hell she wants, even if she's lying about it, which she is. Anyways, in this election, there are red flags already going up that should remind you a lot about what happened in 2020. First of all, you have a state where people who are illegal aliens are voting, and they somehow ended up on their voter registration. They went to the judge to have these names removed and cancel out their votes. The judge said, no, count them. This is a violation of our Constitution. This isn't a state law. This is our constitutional law. The judge's job is to uphold the Constitution. She said, reinstate the voter registration so that the illegal ballots can be counted. So this is going to go to the Supreme Court. But look at this. Then you have another judge in another state saying, count the late ballots. That's another violation of the law. All votes must be in by election day. there's late mail that comes in, but as long as it has the stamp on there from the post office showing that it was received by the day of the election, then it gets counted. And this is a swing state judge saying all late ballots should be counted. Sounds familiar. In addition to that, you can see right here, Ben Shapiro is talking about they received a text from the New York Times. And what has happened is now, right before the election, Media Matters is pushing hardcore to have a bunch of what they call right-wing media, a lot of very popular YouTubers, podcasters that are supporters of Trump. They want them removed off the platforms right before election time. So people like Ben Shapiro, Benny Johnson, people who have a lot of subscribers, they want these people removed. Tucker Carlson. So not only is that a violation of your free speech rights, which is constitutionally protected, but it's like election interference. They're trying to control the narrative all over again. We're going to listen to a man analyze the early voting and make a comparison to where it was in 2020 and what the outlook is starting to look like already in early voting. Understand that it's Democrats that usually do early voting, not Republicans. Republicans usually show up on the day of election and vote. So if the Republicans are anywhere near the Democrat number-wise, then it's a bad situation for the Democrats because, like I said, Democrats usually do the early voting. Republicans usually show up the day of the election. That's why most of the times when you see polls or see what's happening during early voting, it's kind of slanted only because of the way people vote. So again, Democrats vote early. Republicans usually vote during the day of the election. What should be happening right now is if Kamala wants to have a chance, she has to be up big time in the numbers now before Election Day. Let's take a look.
Already representing a quarter of the total votes in the 2020 cycle, 40 million ballots have been cast all around the nation. Republicans are overperforming expectations, as registered Republicans vote early or return mail-in ballots at an unusually high rate, you have most likely heard. Based on these figures, let us explore the data and create an electoral college map for 2024.
Now take a look. The Democrats, 42%. Republicans, 40%. That's where the votes are. Right now, Kamala Harris is getting 42% of the votes. Trump is getting 40%. Based on this right here, most likely what you're going to see happen is not only is Trump going to get the electoral votes, but he most likely is going to win the popular vote as well.
To evaluate whether Democrats have cause for worry at this point. At the time of this recording, registered Republicans cast 40% of the ballots, registered Democrats cast 42%, and independents, or third-party voters, cast 18%. Early on, Democrats clearly have a small edge. Historically, they prefer mail-in and early in-person voting. Republicans often show up more on Election Day itself. Having said that, the real surprise is how small the gap is. Hence, instead of basing our estimates on these figures at face value, we will probe demographic trends.
Another thing that I think is really interesting, for the first time, people are allowed to bet on the election outcome. Now, they go around and they show you all these weird polls, and most of the time, depending on who's reporting the numbers, it can be very skewed. But as I was talking to my friend, I go, if you really want to know the truth about what the public is really thinking, all you got to do is go to Vegas and look at who is betting on to win the presidency. Because we're dealing with people's money, okay? Now, to me, this is a much better way to get an idea of what the people are really thinking. Like I said, you're playing with people's monies. So who is the favorite to win on Election Day? Trump. Trump is up 63% over Kamala Harris, 36%. So the people are betting that Trump is going to win the election. 6 out of every 10 people have bet in favor of Trump to win. That gives you an idea of how people are going to vote, in my opinion. So the fact that Trump is favored to win the presidency, 63% over Kamala Harris, 36%, tells you a whole lot about what's on people's minds.
At the time of this recording, registered Republicans cast 40% of the ballots, registered Democrats cast 42%, and independents, or third-party voters, cast 18%. Early on, Democrats clearly have a small edge. Historically, they prefer mail-in and early in-person voting. Republicans often show up more on Election Day itself. Having said that, the real surprise is how small the gap is. Hence, Instead of basing our estimates on these figures at face value, we will probe demographic trends, polling data, and prediction markets to better understand possible outcomes. Let us start now. First, NBC News does not have early voting data for the 4 states, Missouri, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Alabama, which are already clearly marked as solid Republicans on this map since the states have not reported any results. Each of these states, however, voted for Donald Trump by at least 15 points in 2020. Once all the votes are tallied, there is no reason to doubt they will support him by a great margin once more. I'll skip a thorough examination of every safe state for every candidate to keep things moving. Early vote results point to Republicans dominating in the following states as expected for former President Trump: Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, and Alaska. Along with the 1st and 3rd districts, Kansas and Oklahoma, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, statewide, are found over the Great Plains. While in Appalachia, West Virginia, and Indiana round out the list, in the South, Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, and South Carolina are displaying their typically strong Republican support. Not voting Democratic since at least 2008, each of these states backed Trump by notable margins in 2020. Early voting figures already show Republicans are already leaping out to major advantages in every single one of these states, leading by margins of roughly 15 to 40 points. Their combined count as 125 electoral votes. Remember, the magic number required to guard the White House is 270. Regarding Kamala Harris, Democrats also hold strong early leads in several deep blue states. We have Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii down the Pacific coast. Illinois is the only solidly blue non-coastal state eastward. The rest of these Democratic strongholds are in the Northeast: New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. Joe Biden carried all these states by at least 15 points in 2020, and none have voted Republican since 1988, 8 cycles ago. And once more, Democrats are expectedly leading here by rather very large margins in the early vote. With 180 electoral votes, they together propel Kamala Harris ahead of Trump now. That leaves 17 more competitive states to now examine more closely. First, let's start with Nevada, where the early vote totals have attracted more interest than any other state this cycle. Usually at this point, we would be talking about the Democratic firewall here.
For those of you who don't know what the firewall is, this is a state that should hold up whatever political party has the firewall. So if it was a Republican firewall, then they should be holding the ground for Republicans and vote Republican. If it's a Democrat holding ground, then they should hold for the Democrats. But what they're saying here is this Democrat firewall, it's actually up for grabs. This is not a good thing for the Democrats.
Whether Republicans could close the Election Day divide, with almost 600,000 ballots already cast, almost half the total expected vote, Republicans are currently outnumbering Democrats by 6 percentage points. Arguably, this early campaign data point for Kamala Harris raises serious concerns. With 1.3 million votes, Nevada's last early vote total in 2020 favored Democrats by 4 points, so enabling Biden to hold Nevada in the Democratic column by 2.4%. Nevada has, nevertheless, shown a slow Republican turn in line with national trends. Clinton gained Nevada by the same 2.4% margin in 2016, although with a smaller national popular vote margin. Republicans also seized on this trend by turning the governor's office upside down in 2022. Based on 43 polls in the Decision Desk HQ polling average, current polling shows Trump trailing Harris by 0.9%. Democrats just have to start chipping away at this Republican early vote advantage in the next week in a race as close as this. Else we might see Trump overperforming not only in Nevada, but possibly in other battlegrounds as well. Right now, Nevada falls in the tilt Republican column. Trump is the minor favorite here. Turning now to Arizona, still another fiercely competitive race in the Southwest.
This is where Carrie Lake is over there running for Senate. So she's in a serious battle, but Arizona was tied up in a bunch of issues when it came to voting in 2020. As a matter of fact, a lot of those issues are still being fought today. And Carrie Lake is part of those lawsuits. Already, they're starting to see trends, once again in Arizona, that some hanky-panky might be going on when it comes to the voting. But let's just continue and see what this guy is saying.
With Biden carrying it by just 0.3%, Arizona ranked second closest state by margin in 2020. The fast expansion and diversification of Maricopa County, which includes the Phoenix metro area, helps to explain his success. High turnout among Hispanic and college-educated voters ever so gently turned the county and hence the state at large into the Democratic column. Now, early vote numbers show Republicans are on track for a strong showing here again, leading Democrats by 6 points among the 1.2 million mail-in and early in-person votes cast.
So the fact that the Republicans are even leading in a lot of these states in early voting is a bad sign for the Democrats.
Currently at 42% Republican to 36% Democrat. Out of the 2.8 million early ballots returned, Republicans led Democrats by only 3 points, 38% to 35%. Comparing this to the 2020 election, we find Republicans overperforming that number by 3 points. Given Biden's meager 0.3% margin of victory in 2020, any Democratic slippage in Arizona could prove lethal for the party. Based on 59 polls, Trump currently leads Harris by 1.9%, so supporting this trend as well. Especially Arizona has been the one central battleground state where Trump has regularly polled even with or ahead of Harris dropped from the ballot. We will thus classify Arizona as a tilt Republican, alongside Nevada. Trump is preferred to carry both states, barring significant increase in Democratic early voter turnout. Then come Colorado and New Mexico. While he only carried New Mexico by 11%, thus in terms of the early vote here so far, Democrats outnumber Republicans by 12 points in New Mexico right now. 2020 notably marked the first time in over 50 years that Colorado voted to the left of New Mexico, as it trended hard to the left to favor Joe Biden by almost 14 points. Note here that historically Colorado's independence, which explains the plurality of votes cast thus far, is quite left-leaning. Once more, Biden prevailed by 13.5%. Back in 2020, the early vote indicated Democrats also only had a 2-point advantage over Republicans, with 40% of those ballots returned by independents. Returning to our electoral map, now I am going to mark both states in the safe blue column, since Democrats are expected to match their 2020 margins. Completing the Southwest with Texas, the second biggest electoral prize on the map, valued 40 votes. Texas has already seen more than any other state with just the first few days of early voting. Over 4 million ballots cast. With 54% to 36% over Democrats, Republicans presently lead 18 points in the early vote. With over 9.5 million ballots cast, the early and absentee vote leaned Republican by 17 points in 2020, when Trump won Texas by 5.6%, the narrowest Republican margin in Texas this century. Given Republicans are up about a point here, the early 2024 figures we are seeing here seem to fairly closely reflect 4 years ago. Based on 18 polls, Trump likewise leads by 6.6% over Harris in the poll average, relative to the 2020 margin, a 1-point overperformance as well. Furthermore, given Hispanic voters' ongoing Republican trend, it is more likely that Democrats reach their ceiling in Texas in 2020 and might find it difficult to raise on that performance this cycle. These elements will thus help us to classify Texas as most likely Republican. Now, Divine, moving to the southeast here in Florida, another state where the first few days of early voting have yielded a sizable total of almost 4 million ballots returned. Leading here also by a 9-point margin, Republicans account for 44% of the votes cast thus far, relative to Democrats' 35%. For Kamala Harris, this represents still another alarming statistic. Democrats led the final early vote tally, totaling more than 9 million by 1 point, as back in 2020 when Trump carried Florida by 3.5 points. Over the past few years, the Florida Democratic Party has had just a terrible time here. Since 2020, Republicans have registered far more voters. Over the past few cycles, the state has followed trend as hard to the right as any other state. Recall back in 2022, Republicans witnessed a localized red wave here as Florida re-elected Senator Marco Rubio and Governor Ron DeSantis by landslide margins of more than 15 percentage points apiece. The poll also indicates Trump might win Florida by the biggest margin for a presidential candidate in decades in 2024. Reversing direction on our map, Florida falls into the probably Republican category alongside Texas. Georgia comes next, the closest state in 2020 where Joe Biden turned the peach state blue for the first time in 30 years, winning by a barely perceptible 0.2%. Like Arizona, Biden's triumph could be ascribed to the fast expansion and diversification of Atlanta, the state's largest population center, where record black voter turnout tipped the state ever so slightly in Biden's direction. The possibility for radical racial depolarization, black and Hispanic voters leaning toward Trump, is one of the narratives of this election cycle. Polling crosstabs between October 16th and 31st shows that, compared to 2020, Trump is up by over 20 points on average among black voters.
Woo, man. You got to understand, in order for the Democrats to win an election, they got to keep the Republicans to a maximum 8% of the black vote. If they get anything above 8%, then the Republicans usually win.
A change that might especially harm Democratic prospects in Georgia. The general numbers also show this trend, since the latest polling average shows Trump slightly favored, which leads Harris by 1.3%, depending on 55 polls in the Decision Desk HQ average. Regarding early voting, Georgia is once more seeing a record number of ballots cast early. Early voting exceeds halfway to the overall 2020 turnout. Early or by mail, about 2.8 million ballots have been cast thus. Republicans lead by 4 points, 49% to 45%. Fascinatingly, given 4 million ballots, Republicans exceeded Democrats by 8 points in early voting, indicating a rather positive trend for Democrats returning in 2020. The Harris campaign will take the positive indicators where they can find them at this point, even if Democratic numbers are most likely still distorted due to the overrepresentation of mail-in ballots, which typically are cast first, and lean far more Democratic. While we keep an eye on these figures over the next week, Georgia will remain in the tilt Republican category on our map for now. Worth 16 electoral votes, and another key battleground, Democrats must build a strong early voting lead now, as rural Republican-dominated areas are expected to swing hard for Trump on Election Day. Moving up the southeast coast to North Carolina. So far, though, among the 2.5 million ballots cast thus far, Democrats are once more behind trailing Republicans by 2 points.
Now you heard what he said. Democrats have to pull in front of the Republicans heavily before Election Day in order for them to grab Georgia. And as you can see right now, the Republicans are up big time over the Democrats in early voting. If the Democrats can't get ahead, but they can't just be ahead before Election Day, they have to be way up ahead, because on Election Day is when the Republicans come out to vote. So Georgia looks like it's going to go back to being red.
Worth 16 electoral votes, and another key battleground, Democrats must build a strong early voting lead now, as rural Republican-dominated areas are expected to swing hard for Trump on Election Day. Moving up the southeast coast to North Carolina. So far, though, among the 2.5 million ballots cast thus far, Democrats are once more behind trailing Republicans by 2 points. Court decisions on RFK status on the ballots have complicated early voting in North Carolina. Naturally, the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, which momentarily closed some early voting locations, has added more difficulty. Still, the 2.5 million vote sample size offers insightful analysis. Among almost 4.5 million ballots, Democrats erected a firewall of 5 points over Republicans headed into Election Day in 2020. Trump eventually won the state by more than a point. Again, in a state where high turnout is necessary to remain competitive, Democrats are now performing below their 2020 figures. Based on average of 59 polls, Trump leads Harris by 1.5% right now. Hence, North Carolina will follow other Sunbelt states in the tilt Republican category on our map. With former President Trump leading in the race to 270 electoral votes, 244 over Kamala Harris's 195, we have 9 states to go now. Turning now to the Midwest, first considering Tim Walz's home state of Minnesota as Harris's running mate. Joe Biden carried Minnesota by a 7-point margin in 2020. Democrats led the early vote by 13%. Democrats lead Republicans by 22 points today, with almost 1 million ballots returned. Early in-person ballots have replaced the first waves of mail-in votes, thus this lead has somewhat closed over the past few days. Still, on our electoral map, Minnesota will fit rather nicely in the likely category for Harris and Walz. Turning now to Iowa and Ohio, these two states rank among the fastest right-trending ones in the nation. Both supported Barack Obama in 2008 and once more in 2012, before Donald Trump won them by at least 8 points in both 2016 and 2020. With 300,000 ballots returned, Democrats have a 4-point advantage over Republicans in Iowa as of right now. Compared to 2020, when Democrats led early voting by 12 points before Election Day changed the state to an 8-point win for Trump, this is yet another notable underperformance for them. Actually, Republicans are underperforming somewhat over in Ohio. They lead Democrats among the 2.3 million ballots returned thus far. But this is a 1-point decline from the 10-point early vote lead Republicans had in 2020 among the 3.3 million early ballots cast. Although Republicans still have time to expand on this margin, there is also some evidence that Democratic losses in Ohio and more general Appalachia may be slowing. Based on an average of 14 polls, Trump leads Harris by roughly 6 points in Ohio. Democrats observed small increases in suburban areas in the midterm elections. Especially, every one of the last 7 polls reveals Trump somewhat below his 8-point margin of expectation for 2020. Thus, on our map, Ohio stays in the likely Republican category for now, while Iowa moves into the safe Republican column. Let us now concentrate on the core Upper Rust Belt trio, the WIMPA states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which will once more be vital in this race. Since 1988, these states have voted together in every election, supporting Democrats every time until they virtually turned to Trump in 2016 by less than a point, so providing the required votes to reach 270. But in 2020, they all turned back to Biden, so guaranteeing his route to the presidency. Now once more, for the 2024 contest, winning at least one of these states determines both candidates' routes.
Keep in mind, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania were all part of the whole fiasco in 2020. Each one of them had issues. Depending on who you're talking to, people believe that those states were actually rigged. So if you take that into consideration, then you have to question whether or not Biden actually won those states. They're most likely going to vote red.
270 most, certainly. Kamala Harris might possibly need all 3. Harris could reach 270 electoral votes, with a perfect sweep of the Rust Belt states, even if Trump were to sweep the 4 Sun Belt battlefields, as he does here. Starting in Wisconsin, demographically and fundamentally, this trio of upper Midwest states is most Republican-leaning. In past cycles, Wisconsin has regularly voted to the right of Michigan and Pennsylvania. Its more rural population makes it particularly sensitive to Trump's power among white working-class voters. Trump notably exceeded the final polling averages here by more than 6.5 points in both 2016 and 2020. Based on 67 polls, Trump now has a meager lead of 0.4% over Harris in the 2024 polling average, although Biden led by over 8 points in 2020 and Clinton trailed by about 6 points. Regarding early voting, the first mail-in ballots gave Democrats a head start, but as early in-person voting has continued and over 800,000 ballots have been tallied, the advantage has closed. By 12 points, Democrats lead Republicans. This margin keeps daily shrinking. By 8 points in the almost 2 million votes cast before Election Day in 2020, Republicans exceeded Democrats. It's just a matter of waiting to see whether Republicans can surpass Democrats in early voting, and subsequently by what margin. Based on present poly-market betting estimates, Trump has a 57% chance of winning Wisconsin. Thus, I generally agree with public opinion. For those who have been tracking,
like I was saying, don't pay attention to the polls, pay attention to the betting. There's a different sentiment whenever you're talking to people about which direction they're going to go in when they have to cough up their own cash. So that to me is a better idea of what direction people are going in when cash is involved.
Even with Harris leading earlier in the cycle, for now, therefore, Wisconsin is shown on our map in the tilt Republican category. In Michigan, where I have generally been more hopeful for Harris than the public, things are different. Having supported Biden by almost 3 points in 2020, Michigan is essentially the bluest of the 3 WIMPA states. Democrats have shown great performance in down-ballot contests since then. Based on their 64 poll average, the newest polling average from Decision Desk HQ shows the two candidates in an exact tie. The lead has been constantly shifting over the past few weeks. Regarding the early vote, Democrats have a 14-point advantage, 52% to 38%. Almost 1.5 million votes have already been returned. Once more, daily narrowing of this Democratic edge is occurring. With Biden winning Michigan by 2.8%, Republicans outnumbered Democrats by 2 points among the 3.2 million early or mail-in ballots back in 2020. Keeping this in mind, I will thus mark Michigan as tilting Democrat for Harris here right now. If we do see these three states separate, I believe Pennsylvania will vote somewhere in between, while Wisconsin and Michigan most likely will differ. Speaking of Pennsylvania worth 19 electoral votes, this is the most important battlefield on the map. With both Harris and Trump's chances of obtaining 270 electoral votes skyrocketing to almost 90% should they carry Pennsylvania, Nate Silver's latest presidential forecast gives Pennsylvania a 31% chance of tipping the election either way. Based on 88 polls, the polling average right now shows Trump leading by 0.2%, more than in any other state. Since Harris became the Democratic nominee, the margin has stayed inside the usual range for a polling error. Pennsylvania is, all things considered, absolutely as purple as it gets. A real 50-50 battlefield. Early voting numbers show 1.2 million ballots returned already. Pennsylvania lacks conventional early voting. Voters must personally seek a mail-in ballot at the county clerk's office. Regarding Nebraska's 2nd district, it is virtually entirely urban around Omaha and boasts a far more varied population with a lot of college graduates. It voted for Biden by 6.5 points, and this cycle it probably will trend more to the left. Based on an analysis of the early vote thus far, Donald Trump is on target to win the election with 278 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 241, and 19 votes in Pennsylvania placed in the toss-up category. It goes most likely blue for Harris. We keep moving toward a quite close final result.
So that's his YouTube channel right here. I will leave a link for you guys to come here and check this person out. His analysis is pretty interesting, but like I said, if you want to get a true picture of what the public really thinks, you can go over to where people are betting with their hard-earned money, and that will tell you everything you need to know about what the country is really thinking is going to win the presidency. So you can break it down state by state, who's in lead and who's not. Maybe I'll do a video on that later on. But I can tell you right now, it's not looking good for the Democrats. Anyways, that's it for now. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think, and I'll get back at you later. I'm out.